coming on the air with Twitter hitting the edit button on its management because the world's richest guy, Elon Musk, he's buying it. And he says he wants to make Twitter better than ever. The White House worried about transparency. So coming up, we're going to look at what it means for you, the tweeter, and for democracy, bigger picture. Also breaking out of New York, former President Trump is fighting back against this court decision that'll cost him $10,000 a day. Why his lawyers say they are following an order to turn over documents as part of this investigation into his businesses. Plus, a former high school football coach looks like he could win big at the Supreme Court after he was fired for praying on the field. But some are accusing him of a pray-to-play kind of thing. We're going to explain what that means in a second. And a Texas court gives a lifeline to a mother set to be executed after new evidence that she says might overturn her murder conviction. We've got her reaction, plus more than 100 kids in the U.S. coming down with hepatitis. It's not clear why, but we'll explain why doctors are really concerned about it later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're coming on the air with breaking news. Elon Musk set to take Twitter private for the low price of $44 billion, putting the world's richest person in charge of one of the most influential social media platforms out there. Twitter officials saying that they conducted, in their words, a thoughtful process to look at Musk's proposal, and they think it's the best path forward for the company's shareholders. Musk's reaction coming where else? On Twitter. Yes, that's what he says. Yes, with a heart and a star and a rocket ship emoji. He quoted from this press release where he says free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy. He says he hopes to unlock Twitter potential for users. We're going to explain what does that mean. You want to unlock Twitter's potential in a second. But let me just say this is such big business news that even the White House was asked about it. They're not commenting specifically on Musk's Twitter takeover, but the press secretary reiterating the president's concerns about social media in general.
The president has long been concerned about the power of large social media platforms, the power they have over our everyday lives, has long argued that tech platforms must be held accountable for the harms they cause.
If your neck hurts from all the whiplash, we get it. Because remember last week, Twitter was expected to turn down the offer. The board put in a so-called poison pill to block him from being able to do this exact thing. Let me bring in the perfect person to break this down, and that's Joe Linkett, who is live for us on all of this. You know, not everybody uses Twitter, Joe. Like, let's be real. Twitter is not real life. We hear it all the time. But about a quarter of Americans do use it, right? It has a big impact, I think, in some sectors of society. Tell us more about, like, is this a good deal for people who use Twitter or not?
Well, it certainly means that there's a lot of change on the horizon. When Elon Musk made this offer, his idea was to put his stamp on the company. You'll remember that he first acquired 9% of the company, then that evolved to this $44 billion deal that was struck today. And what he's basically promising is the free speech argument, his version of free speech. And he's very concerned about any sort of censorship and moderation on the platforms. He wants to open up the algorithm to be open source so anyone can see how decisions are made when it comes to what you see in your Twitter feed. He wants to authenticate all humans. He also wants to shut down all the bot accounts, which is a very tall order, a very difficult thing to do. But the critics of Elon Musk say, you know, this is a guy who's already trolling and bullying on Twitter. I spoke with one particular critic who said she says as a woman she would not necessarily feel safer on Twitter, on the platform, if Elon Musk were to own it. And so there's a lot of concern and pushback to what that free speech would actually yield. Now, one of the big questions, of course, is will the banned accounts be allowed to return in the case of former President Donald Trump and NAACP urging Elon Musk not to allow that. Former President Trump already saying, I'm not coming back as of today.
So that's what he told Fox News in this exclusive discussion, apparently, although things may change, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen if Musk does eventually take over. Like, you talked a little bit, Joe, about like the differences we might see under Elon Musk here. But there are some big ones. It's not just this idea of an edit button, which Musk has said he would support. There's some like bigger picture changes, too.
Yeah, there's the question of will he make this a subscriber service and basically make Twitter two tiers, that maybe some of the power VIP users who want to pay $2 to $3 a month. That's an idea that Wedbush Securities senior analyst Dan Ives and I were talking about just a few hours ago. Will he also make a free ad-supported version continue to be available? And so these things really do change the idea of that digital public square that Elon Musk is talking about in his statement today, and it really does change change the landscape of what is arguably the most influential social media company, even though, yes, it's a lot smaller than Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, of course, and only, 23% of Americans are on Twitter right now. But that's really the question, is like, what does it look like? And then who does it attract and who does it repel? Because that is what ultimately, that's what Twitter is. It's the community, the sum of its parts.
It's a take factory, right? That's in many ways what Twitter is. And there have been a billion takes about this Elon Musk purchase just in the last couple of hours since we've known about it. Have we heard anything? You and I have talked about this before a little bit. The Twitter employees, right, who are now looking at the prospect of somebody else owning the company, taking it private. We don't know, right, who's going to be the CEO necessarily under Elon Musk. Like, there are some management changes on the horizon, too.
Yeah, Parag's future as CEO certainly in question right now. But yeah, I've been looking through some of my DMs, talking to some sources, also scrolling, of course, through Twitter. And you're seeing some employees wonder about what the future holds. And there's people who say, this is more than a job. I'm here because I want to make the world a better place. One particular employee who works on elections was saying, I hope that, my values align with Elon Musk's values. But remember, he's going to be owning this company, and he'll be this is one big job of 3 big jobs he has. And so Wall Street also really worried about the fact that he's running SpaceX, he's running Tesla, he's also going to be owning Twitter now. How much time does he plan to devote to it? And then, obviously, what will happen to the other 2 companies? Because those are really valuable stocks and really valuable companies when it comes to innovation and technology. So there's a lot of unanswered questions as we head into this process, which, by the way, is still not approved. You got to have shareholder and regulatory approval. They expect it sometime this year, Hallie.
Okay, so timeline sometime this year. We'll see what happens. Joel and Ken, thank you so much. Good to see you. Appreciate
Thanks, Hallie. Good to see you.
In other breaking news, just in the last little bit, actually, former President Trump's attorney says they're going to appeal a New York court decision to hold him in contempt for failing to turn over documents to the state's attorney general. He faces a fine of $10,000 a day until he does it. The former president's lawyer says they have been complying, that all documents responsive to the subpoena, they say, were produced to the attorney general months ago. To give you the backstory here, this is all part of New York Attorney General Letitia James' civil investigation, right? So not criminal, but civil investigation into the business practices of the Trump organization. The allegation is that they'd been inflating financial statements to get better loans, to get better tax breaks. In a pair of tweets, James called the ruling a major victory, saying today justice prevailed, adding that our investigation into Donald Trump and the Trump organization's financial dealings will continue undeterred because no one is above the law, she says. Tom Winter joins me now. So, Tom, $10,000 a day, that's not nothing, right? And the judge essentially saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, but in layman's terms, that the former president has kind of dragged his feet to comply with Letitia James' subpoena. Is this a big deal or is it not a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal because I think $10,000 for anybody is going to be a potential issue. He's got to prove here that, one, he either has absolutely done his best to get these documents and furnish them in the course, as you said, civil, not criminal investigation into the president, and find some way, if he takes this to the appeals court and he says that he's going to appeal it through his attorneys, to prove that he's done the best he can. If not, he's going to have to provide documents. What I think makes this important is not just the $10,000 figure, but if, in fact, he has not turned over documents that could be bad for him in the course of this investigation, obviously that's more significant. Time will tell. The president, obviously, as you said, making it clear that they believe, he and his attorneys, the former president, saying, look, we've done the best that we can here. So I think time will tell the significance of this. Of course, he may not end up paying a dime because an appeals court could say, look, we stay this decision until we've had a chance to look at it. And they could overturn what the judge has decided. 2 pieces of information, though, have come up since the last time we spoke about this here on News Now. One is that the fine is not retroactive, so it'll be from the date of the order, presumably today when it's entered. It doesn't go back to March 31st. And then the fact that this will be appealed, that was a little unclear whether or not the president's attorneys had a path to appeal this, and it appears that they do, and they will take it.
So real quick then, Tom, where does all of this legal battle and the others that the Trump organization is enmeshed in go from here?
Well, as far as the Trump Organization, they still face a criminal charge in Manhattan. Obviously, its CFO, Alan Weisselberg, we've talked about that a couple of times here, Hallie. They face criminal prosecution. There's no indication that there's any sort of criminal prosecution pending against the president. There's been no overt steps that we've been aware of with respect to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. There are other organizations, such as just in the last several minutes, Cushman & Wakefield, which is a real estate firm firm that's done business with the former president's company. They have been compelled to come forward with documents that the Attorney General's office says that they have yet to provide on several different land deals and some evaluations and appraisals that they've done. So there's some collateral damage here as well. We've seen that in a number of the president's civil and criminal cases and investigations, Hallie, and we've talked about them probably hundreds of times. But as far as the impact on the president himself, it's unclear whether he'll even have to pay the fine today. To be continued.
Tom Winter, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Let's take you now down to the border where some breaking news happened right as we were coming on the air. A couple of Republican state attorneys general say they've won a court order that would stop President Biden from letting Title 42 expire. You're going, wait a second, what's Title 42? That's the policy that was put in place under Donald Trump, the former president, that lets the Border Patrol turn away migrants because of the pandemic. So here's from one of the AGs. Again, this is right as we were walking into the studio here, who filed the lawsuit, Eric Schmidt from Missouri. He says this is a huge victory for border security, but says the fight continues on. And you've got top Republicans in Washington, including House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, the top Republican in the House of Representatives, who went to the border, traveling there. That's Kevin McCarthy there just this afternoon to slam President Biden's plan. Watch.
If President Biden lifts Title 42, what we see today will be much worse. A country without a secure border is not a country.
So what's the context check here? Check out the numbers we're getting from the Department of Homeland Security. Border encounters are up 33% from February to March, 166,000 to just about 221,000. DHS officials said last month there could be up to 18,000 border crossings a day if Title 42 expires. Morgan Chesky is near the border in Eagle Pass, Texas. Morgan, I know you've been on the ground for the Republican visit there. We've got this developing news late tonight from these Republican attorneys general. Explain why they want to make sure Title 42 stays in place.
Hallie, they view Title 42 as a necessary, albeit temporary, tool to make sure that these surge in numbers stay in relative check, because right now we're looking at record numbers being made each and every month. At least that's what the current pace is showing. We heard from Leader McCarthy, House Minority Leader McCarthy, earlier today, and he said that this was not a permanent solution, but as of right now, it's the best solution they have in order to return migrants to Mexico using this pandemic tool that really essentially stemmed from public health. That's now, as we kind of leave the pandemic, becoming more and more controversial because critics will point to it as no longer necessary. Meanwhile, Republicans see it as a necessary tool simply because the numbers are becoming so overwhelming here at the border. Hallie?
I know you talked with the sheriff down there at Eagle Pass, right? What's he telling you?
He told me that he grew up in this area and that he's never seen it like this before. And he says that he was frustrated because he had reached out to the delegation but was unable to speak to anybody. He was not invited to speak to them about what he's witnessing, what his deputies are witnessing here on the ground. And here's how he summed up just his sentiment regarding this ongoing situation. Take a listen.
I say that I need the manpower. I need the assistance. If they really want us to work, the Sheriff's Department, because we cover a whole bunch of territory, to give us that assistance to hire a whole bunch of deputies. A whole bunch of deputies. That's what I need.
And the sheriff tells me that right now it is an absolute team effort. He only has 4 to 5 deputies working in a massive county per shift, Hallie. He says that manpower is huge and that he simply doesn't have enough of that or of the finances to go out and get additional resources as well. And that's the sentiment echoed with almost any agency you talk to that has redirected so many resources already to the border and are finding it simply not enough.
But the Biden administration has been pretty clear, Morgan, that they would like this policy to be lifted.
Correct. The Biden administration has put a date on it, May 23rd. That is the scheduled time that they think Title 42 should end. And we heard from the Republican delegation today who said if that happens, we will be worse off than we are today. Hallie, I should note that the Department of Homeland Security is estimating 170,000 migrants would surge across the border from Texas, Arizona, California. That's the estimated number when Title 42 would end on May 23rd. I asked the agency chief, Ruiz, of all of Border Patrol, if that happens, are you ready to handle that surge? He says they have a plan in place, but those numbers are absolutely daunting. Hallie?
Morgan Chesky, live for us there along the border. Morgan, thank you. Let's take you over to Ukraine now, where top U.S. officials are showing up in person for the first time in a couple months to show just how committed they are to helping Ukraine beat Russia in this war. You see them here, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who had a very high-profile, kind of secret meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The two U.S. officials are pledging more money, and Secretary Austin is laying out the goal of this war from the U.S. perspective. Watch.
We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine.
We want to see Russia weakened, he says. That's significant. So who are you looking at now? President Biden nominating Bridget Brink, that's who this is, as the next ambassador to Ukraine, as the U.S. looks to open the embassy in Kyiv. It's all happening as Russia is hitting western Ukraine with an attack on a rail station not too far from Lviv, a train station, basically. It's one of 5 of them hit in the span of 1 hour today. Officials in Lviv say, fortunately, nobody got hurt. Cal Perry is in Kyiv for us now. And Cal, what's interesting is it felt like all of the intensity around the Russian offensive here in Ukraine was in the east, right? Near the areas that Russian-backed separatists had already controlled. That's where the focus seemed to be. Now we're seeing what seem to be these warning shots in western Ukraine. What else do we know about those strikes?
Yeah, and it seems to be in what we can say is direct response to this visit, right? We've had foreign leaders coming via the train now for weeks. Boris Johnson did it a couple weeks ago. We had the Secretaries of Defense and State doing it yesterday. And again, we should remind our viewers on Saturday night, President Zelensky said they were coming. And while we couldn't confirm it with the White House or the Pentagon for security reasons, it kind of gave up the visit. That's your semi-secret sort of reference there, right? But these strikes on these railways are really twofold. If you take it as a response to the visit, as one of those things, that's fine. The secondary purpose of that is to stop the weapons that are coming in. And that was the purpose, really, of this visit, right, is to sort of increase the number of weapons and the type of weapons that are headed to the east. That's where the fighting is, absolutely. But your point, I think, is the right one, which is the Russians can still reach far into the western part of the country with these airstrikes, Hallie.
Let's talk about Mariupol, right? We've talked about it a lot. I think people know that name because this is one of the cities that was basically under siege by Russia, right? You now have this Russian official saying, oh, we're letting people leave this steel plant there that we've been hitting. The mayor of Mariupol says, nah, that's not the case, right? And now there's some talk that President Zelensky might try to get help on evacuations from Turkey.
Yeah, and look, Turkey is the thing that makes sense, right? We had those negotiations between the foreign minister of Russia and the foreign minister of Ukraine taking place in Turkey last month, but the reality is nothing came of them. I mean, those meetings were a failure. And you have this happening on the Russian side, where the Russians are saying they're going to open up a corridor, and they're announcing it from the defense ministry in Moscow. I don't know how much of that is for domestic consumption, but I can tell you those humanitarian corridors are not working out. And the mayors of these towns are all saying the same thing, which is we try to open up the corridor, the Russians' commanders actually arrive, tell people to disperse, and then start shelling the area out.
So what's the next thing that Ukrainian people are hoping for? The U.S. is preparing, it seems, to get ready to send more ammo over to Ukraine. That's on top of the, billions of dollars in military help that the country has already provided.
Yeah. Well, they want to push the Russians now completely out of Ukraine. I think the tone of this war has shifted in the 2 months that it's been going on from we need to slow down the Russians, we need to try to stop them where they are, to now we need to drive them out of the country. These howitzers, according to the Ukrainian defense secretary, could be a turning point. These howitzers are heavy artillery that are long-range artillery. They can shoot 40 kilometers down range. The hope is not only is that going to stop the Russians, but it's going to push them out of the east, Hallie.
Cal Perry, live for us there in Kyiv. Cal, it's good to see you tonight from Ukraine. Thank you. Turning back to news here out of Washington and from the Supreme Court, the building just down the street from where we are here. Hearing the case today of this former Washington State high school football coach. This coach lost his job after he refused to stop praying on the field. His name's Joe Kennedy. This is him. He started praying right on the 50-yard line years ago, back in 2008. And then later, he'd invite his own players and players from the other team that they were going up against to join in. But in 2015, the district heard about it, and he lost his job after he refused to stop. So the question now, whether Kennedy's post-game prayers were considered to be his own private religious expression, or whether they were essentially government speech because he was a public school employee in his capacity as that employee. I want to bring in now Pete Williams. So, Pete, this is an interesting case that is bringing this question of religious freedom really into focus here for the court. It was oral arguments, which means we don't have a decision, obviously. But you read tea leaves, my friend. I know you do. What do you think? What's your sense?
My sense is the coach is going to win, and probably a fairly narrow ruling. I think the court had to basically struggle with two things. As you say, was this his own private speech, or was it, as the government said, you know, you've got to knock this off or we're going to get sued for endorsing your religious views? I think it was persuasive for the court that this, as Brett Kavanaugh, you know, who's done some coaching.
Yes.
He said, look, I understand that coaches can be coercive, that they determine whether you get played, how much time you get, whether you start. But he said he didn't do this. Kavanaugh said the coach didn't do this in the locker room. He did at one time, but not anymore. He didn't do it in a huddle. He did it on the field after the game. And I think for the majority of the justices, that made it his own private speech. On the other hand, there was this question of coercion. Many of the justices thought, you know, he is the coach, whether he says come and join me or not. Players are going to feel some subtle pressure to go along with it. But again, I think that is not going to be the linchpin for the Supreme Court. I think they're going to say this was his private religious expression. But I don't think, as some people were figuring this case might be, I don't think the court is willing to say, and teachers can lead prayer in school, in the classroom. I think that is a bridge too far.
So when you say narrow, you mean specifically to this instance and not necessarily something we can extrapolate. What's interesting here is that the school had given the coach other places, other options, basically. You say private religious expression, middle of the football field.
Sure.
They had said, hey, go to, you know, other locations. This is something that Justice Sotomayor picked up on. Listen to this.
He's the one who chose to publicize his prayer by doing it on the 50-yard line. What religion requires you to do it at that spot?
So the coach's religion, and he felt, and nobody's questioned the sincerity of his religious beliefs.
So if he had done this more privately, like in a different location or without a lot of the media attention, which was something else that was picked up on today, would this have become this big of an issue?
No, and I think that's one of the reasons why this thing is sort of bound up by the facts. It's very complicated of who do you believe. It's clearly not the coach on his own, by his own self, sneaking out to the 50-yard line after the game, dropping to one knee, silently saying a prayer, and then leaving. It started out that way. But he actually drew a crowd, and it didn't bother him, and he seemed to invite more people to come. At one point, inviting a member of the state legislature to join him, saying the prayers not just silently but out loud. And the thing became a spectacle, and I think that's part of the sort of factual morass that the court had to wade through today. It would have been a lot cleaner case if it was just the coach going out and praying by himself. But on the other hand, I'm not sure the school district would have told him to stop if that's all it was.
So bottom line, as we look ahead, first of all, decision this term, right?
Yes.
Where does this sort of, and forgive me for asking this in a weird way, but where does this case rank on religious freedom cases that the court has taken up? Because I know this is a hugely important issue to a lot of people in this country.
Yes, and it's not the only religious freedom case. Still to come is probably a case that will further erode the wall of separation between church and state. And that's this question of whether state taxpayers' money can be used to finance religious education in high schools. And the court seems prepared to say yes. So that would, I think, be a bigger deal. You know, I don't think that this case is going to be the one that further erodes separation of church and state. But I will say this. Over time, especially with this new conservative majority, you see a shift in the court's view about the government and religion. It used to be the view that government had to be strictly neutral, otherwise it was endorsing religion. Now I think the view is the government is hostile to religion and needs to be more accommodating. That seems to be the evolving view at the court.
Pete Williams, big sort of SCOTUS season coming up for you, my friend, I know, in these next couple of months. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. We've got some new details just into us about text messages sent by former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, after former President Trump's defeat in the 2020 election. These messages were looked at by our team at NBC News, showing Meadows twice ask Raffensperger to call the White House, once on November 19th, the other on December 5th. You'll remember the former president spoke with Raffensperger on January 2nd, 2021, when he urged him to, quote, find the votes, in his words, to try to overturn that legitimate defeat by Donald Trump to President Biden in Georgia. A spokesman for Raffensperger says he doesn't remember the first text from Meadows and he thought the second one was a prank. Hallie Vitale is on Capitol Hill. Hallie, listen, when we talk about text messages right now, there's a lot of news about them, specifically as it relates to this investigation into January 6th. Give us the big picture and what is most significant in the reporting that is out there. I know that NBC News has not independently confirmed, but, for example, CNN has.
Yeah, exactly. And Hallie, we're talking right now not about a few text messages, but more than 2,000 text messages between Mark Meadows and roughly 40 lawmakers, other people that are key in Trump world, Trump allies, people who are at the heart of the January 6th investigation, even the former president's family members, people like Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. All of these people are in this trove of text messages. There are some surprising things in here. Specifically, you look at, for example, the timeline around the Raffensperger text messages with Mark Meadows. We see that there was a lead up, clearly, and a reticence on the part of Raffensperger to respond. In some cases, he even thought that it couldn't have been real that the White House was asking him to call the White House switchboard. Of course, we know ultimately that Raffensperger and Trump did speak in that now infamous phone call. But of course, then you look at some of the other text messages, and there's some surprising things in there. I think one of the things that drew my attention, for example, was Marjorie Taylor Greene actually saying to Mark Meadows that she heard that there were reports of an active shooter on January 6th and that this was not the goal of the movement that they fomented around the big lie. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene tamping down on the violence. And then, of course, it also helps us, Hallie, to place the efforts that we're undergoing from Trump world to overturn the election. You have various people trying to insert their own messaging narratives around January 6th. Some advisors saying, hey, you should suggest that it's Antifa here, not Trump supporters. Other people trying to just continue ways that they could actually move forward with overturning the election results. We even see in these text messages some lawmakers saying, hey, the president should declare martial law. Of course, that's something that we know some fringe members of his legal team were mulling in those days after the November election. So what it does is it really helps us to contextualize at a granular level what was actually going on here.
And it tells us a little bit, too, about where the January 6th committee is going in their investigation.
Yeah, it gives us a much better sense because we know how many prongs there are to this investigation already. There are parts about disinformation and misinformation online. There are parts about false slates of electors and the efforts that were going on at the state level to invalidate the 2020 election results. And then, of course, there's the key concern of what was going on in those critical hours on January 6th in the White House. Who was talking to the president? What was the president doing? As close as they can get to his mindset on that day, obviously that's the goal. But what these text messages show is that they're going to be able to, for a lot of these lawmakers and people, get a view of the real-time conversations. And it again begs the big question, Hallie. Yes, if they're eventually going to try to get some kind of interview with Trump, sure, that's always over this. But also, when you see all of these dozens of lawmakers on these text messages, you got to wonder, are they going to do more than ask? Are they going to eventually subpoena them?
Hallie Vitale, live for us on Capitol Hill. That is a question a lot of folks are wondering the answer to. Thank you much. Appreciate it. For the first time now, we are seeing and hearing from Alec Baldwin in the minutes after a gun he was holding went off, killing cinematographer Helena Hutchins. Here's Baldwin talking about blood on his clothes when a sheriff's deputy asks him to come in for questioning. Listen.
We would appreciate that, and then we'll...
When do you want me to do that?
We're going to probably go right now.
So can I take my car, that's my car, go back to the base camp, get rid of the wardrobe, get my clothes and stuff, and then I'll follow you?
Yes. I think... No, that's okay. I think we might... I don't know if this is suspected blood or real blood.
No, this is fake.
Fake, okay.
The video is part of a bunch of deputy camera recordings, pictures, interviews released by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office in the shooting investigation on the set of Baldwin's film Rust. The Sheriff's Office says the 6-month-old investigation is still open and ongoing, saying they're waiting for FBI forensics and Baldwin's phone data before handing over the case to the district attorney who would decide on charges. Baldwin has denied pulling the trigger that day back in October. Last week, New Mexico regulators slapped a $136,000 fine on the movie's producers, saying the film management's, in their view, indifference to handling guns on set led to Hutchins' death. The production company says it plans to appeal that report's findings. We got a lot more here on the show for you, including the labor fight at Amazon getting a little bit bigger, with the union vote kicking off at another warehouse in New York. We're going to take you live to Staten Island. And from your screen to a store, we're going to have more on Meta's plans to open a brick and mortar shop coming up in the 5 Things. This week, we're going to find out, is it the beginning of a movement at Amazon when it comes to unionizing? You've got some workers in Staten Island who think maybe, because now a second warehouse there is voting on whether or not to join the new Amazon labor union. They're trying to bring out some heavy hitters to rally support. You see there Senator Bernie Sanders, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, flanked by Christian Smalls, the man who formed this union. And they called out the company for, in their words, not caring enough about workers.
Working people are sick and tired of falling further and further behind while billionaires like Bezos become much richer.
What happened here, out here, right, that you guys did in Staten Island was just the beginning. It was the first domino to fall.
Antonia Hilton is on Staten Island. Feels like the question now, Antonia, and the vote lasts through Friday, is there going to be a second domino that falls or not?
Well, if you talk to the voters, the workers who are here on the ground today, many of them think that this is just the beginning of a movement and that the momentum is behind them. There's been a lot of excitement and anticipation here, people hanging out, talking about the future of what they want their workplace to look like. And it's not just on the heels of the historic vote that happened just a couple weeks ago. They've been working toward this for 2 years, when workers first started to call out Amazon for the way they felt they were treated, for inappropriate work practices, unsafe work conditions during the pandemic. And so for many of them, it's not just about one warehouse, it's about revitalizing an entire labor movement, Hallie.
What does Amazon say about this push?
Well, Amazon has consistently said that they think that unionizing is not right for their employees. They've used terminology sort of like, you know, we want to have a direct relationship with our employees, implying that unions kind of get in the way of the employee-employer relationship. And they've been consistent with that. They've spent over $4 million fighting this unionization effort. And, you know, when you talk to people at this specific site, what's very interesting is that while these warehouses may from the outside look the same, internally there are different kind of company cultures. And so at the first site where this historic vote happened, many of these workers were people who were working, say, 12-hour shifts. They were working shoulder to shoulder. They knew each other really, really well and built up these organic relationships. This is a site with a lot more part-time workers. So that's going to pose a challenge to people trying to unionize, trying to get on the same page with each other about the changes they want to see in their workplace. Because some people, you know, they're just not spending as much time here as they otherwise would be. Take a listen to what some of the employees who see this from a number of different sides shared with us.
I'm against it for right now, but I also want to see what's done in that building as well before I could say like, okay, yes, I support the union.
They started these captive audience meetings where they literally stopped production. Never in the history of Amazon have they ever stopped production to pull everyone into an all-hands-on-deck meeting. So they're really scared of us.
When you talk to folks, what they tell you they think is making this movement different and is giving them hope is that it really was colleague to colleague, friend to friend, and that the celebrity stuff, you know, Bernie Sanders, AOC being here on the ground, that came much later. They've been talking to each other for months and years in some cases, and they think that's what's going to make all the difference now.
So real quick, Antonia, pull back then. From a bigger picture perspective, yes, Amazon's a big name here, but we've been seeing some of this. You look at what's happening in the retail and tech space, Starbucks, for example, that Apple store. Do the organizers you're talking to feel like this may be the start of something bigger, like on the labor front?
Absolutely. They think they're on the cusp of something really important here. And for context, over the last several decades, membership in unions throughout the United States has been dropping. And so the pandemic has in some ways revitalized the conversation around unions, and it's created a coalition, a multiracial coalition of young workers who the pandemic kind of woke them up to the realities of corporate America. And many of them say it was a very rude awakening for them. And so what we're seeing is not just this at Amazon, but as you mentioned, about 200 Starbucks locations have filed since just this last summer. Just last week, an Atlanta Apple store filed to become the first to unionize. So this is the beginning of a new moment, frankly, in American history, Hallie.
Antonia Hilton live for us there on Staten Island. Thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the world's oldest person has died at 119 years old. We're talking about Kane Tanaka of Japan, who was born in 1903. She worked at a store till she was 103. Her family says she kept her mind and body going by doing math and staying curious. Number 2, officials are looking into why a Japanese tour boat disappeared off the northern coast of Japan. The ship left the harbor this weekend for a sightseeing trip with 24 people on board. Authorities say at least 11 of them are dead. They're hoping to find the other missing passengers. Number 3, French President Emmanuel Macron won re-election in France, holding off a challenge from far-right candidate Marine Le Pen for the second time in a row. This time around, Macron won with 58%. But Le Pen did secure the most votes ever for a French far-right candidate. In a victory speech, President Macron thanked his supporters, promising a more independent France and a stronger Europe. Number 4, Facebook's parent company, Meta, getting into the retail game. Just a couple weeks from now, they're going to be opening their very first store. Yes, store in California. If you're thinking, wait a second, what is Meta? What is Facebook selling? Well, their first pair of smart glasses, VR headsets, that's big business for them. Even a wall-to-wall curved LED screen that'll show you what you're seeing in virtual reality. Number 5, a very remote post office in Antarctica is hiring right now if you're looking for a job. It's known as the Penguin Post Office, and every year it hires 4 postmasters to live on the island to sort mail. You also have to sell postage stamps, and you have to count penguins. That's right. Oh, by the way, you also have to live with no running water, no internet, and no cell phone service for 5 months. But still, a lot of people want this job. More than 2,500 people applied one year. The applications closed tonight, so get your resumes polished up and your penguin counting skills quantified if you're interested. The U.S. now one of 11 countries seeing a hepatitis outbreak in kids, and that has the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control really concerned. At least 169 cases of acute hepatitis have been diagnosed in kids from ages just 1 month, from newborns basically, to 16 years old. At least 1 child has died. 17 others have needed liver transplants. And while most of the cases, you look at your map here, most of them have been reported in the UK. Here in the U.S., North Carolina has seen at least 2. Alabama reported 9 cases, which has the CDC now telling doctors, hey, red flag, keep an eye out for anything similar. Dr. John Torres joins me now to talk about this. Dr. John, if we go back to that map, 11 cases in the U.S., it doesn't sound like a huge number, but the CDC is taking this really seriously. Explain why.
And they're taking it very seriously for a few reasons. Number 1, it's children. We always tend to take children when they start getting sick, especially with things that are a bit mysterious, even more serious. And number 2, we don't know exactly why this is happening. And that's what has experts concerned, because they're seeing these clusters around the world. As a matter of fact, just as we were coming to air, Illinois said they have 3 suspected cases. So you can see those numbers creeping up a little bit. And even though they're extremely rare at this point, like you mentioned, they've had to have some with liver transplants. Unfortunately, 1 child died of this. And they can't quite put their thumb on why this is happening, and that's what probably has them the most concerned. So they're sending out the notice, both the CDC and the World Health Organization, to physicians across the globe saying, look out for these cases. If you do have these cases or suspect them, go ahead and report them, because we don't really have an idea of how many are out there, because typically they're not reported, Hallie.
Right. So the CDC is sounding the alarm about this. But is the reason why we're seeing this because there are actually more cases, or because there's more awareness about the cases? Do we know the answer to that?
I think the ones we're going to subsequently see are going to be because of more awareness and more cases as well. But up until now, it's been because the case numbers have been rising, because the awareness really hasn't been there to this point. And like I mentioned earlier, it is one of those things that they can't quite put their finger on. There are a variety of causes of hepatitis, and they can't quite figure out what is causing those over 160 people around the world that have gotten it so far, and particularly what has caused those that have had to have a liver transplant and the one that died. Why did that happen? But you can see here, there are a variety of of types of hepatitis, anywhere from infectious hepatitis. You can see the ones there that we're most familiar probably with A, B, and C, but there's DE, there's even a G-type hepatitis, and then there's non-infectious type hepatitis, and these are ones that people can get from waterborne illnesses as well. They can get it from toxins. Excessive alcohol use is one. Some supplements, especially with the workout type supplements, could cause it, and autoimmune hepatitis. So there's a variety of causes. They can't quite figure out what's causing this one, but they think this is more an infectious type 1, Hallie.
Dr. John Torres, thank you so much for that breakdown. We'll stay on top of it. Appreciate it. A COVID outbreak in one of Beijing's biggest districts has some people worried that that city might be on the brink of spiraling into a Shanghai-style lockdown. Look at the numbers in China's capital city of 21 million people. Only 70 COVID cases have been found so far. But today, Wednesday, and Friday of this week, millions of people will have to be tested. You can see what's happening at grocery stores. Long lines, empty shelves. Some big supermarkets are even extending hours to deal with a huge spike in demand because people are so worried about a lockdown. Legitimate fears in Beijing this could turn into Shanghai, which you're looking at now. 4th week of lockdown in Shanghai. Some parts of the city even putting up fencing to keep people at home. Imagine that, fencing around your neighborhood or your building to keep you inside. Janice Mackey-Freyer is in China with more.
Hallie, for over a month now, this massive COVID lockdown in Shanghai has brought the city to a standstill. Patience has long worn thin with the restrictions there, and at times the mood has boiled over. Now authorities are trying a new tactic, and arguably a harsh tactic. They're putting up metal fencing around apartment buildings to prevent people from being able to get out. And in some cases, they're putting up this fencing in lobbies and in hallways to actually barricade people inside of their apartments. And residents, as you can imagine, are absolutely furious with this. Some people are posting videos to social media showing shouting matches. Some have tried to tear down the metal fencing. At the same time, the censors have been working overtime to remove other viral videos from the internet here. One over the weekend, a compilation of audio recordings, people sharing how they felt about the hardships over the past month. It was everywhere on China's internet on the weekend, and then it just disappeared. And for all of these tough restrictions, the new fencing, COVID cases are still on the rise in Shanghai, and China's government is adamant that they're not going to relent on the zero COVID policy. And now a lot of that lockdown anxiety is extending to here in Beijing. A few dozen cases over the weekend prompted officials to order mass testing in several districts, including the one I live in. I went today. I have to go again on Wednesday and on Friday. And this fear of a lockdown is triggering panic buying. Store shelves were empty last night. They were being restocked today, but there's a lot of turnover in items and huge lineups of people at grocery stores because we've all watched what has happened in Shanghai over the past several weeks, and nobody wants to live a repeat of that here. Now, officials are adamant. They say that there is a stable supply of food here, but at the same time, they're describing the situation as, quote, urgent and grim to try to get COVID under control. They admit that the Omicron variant has been spreading quietly in the capital for over a week now. And so there is the sense that with more mass testing, the case numbers are going to go up, and that could be the trigger for a lockdown. So with the 4-day lockdown, what was supposed to be a 4-day lockdown in Shanghai now dragging into its 4th week, there is real fear building here in Beijing that we could be facing a similar fate.
Janice Mackey-Freyer reporting for us there. Still ahead here on the show, the family of a teen who fell off a ride is suing that amusement park now over his death. We've got more on that coming up in the local. Plus, a Texas court delays the controversial execution of a woman on death row. But Melissa Lucio's lawyers are now saying that her case gets another chance. We've got that after the break. Some pretty intense audio and texts aired out in court today in Johnny Depp's defamation trial against his ex-wife, Amber Heard. We've got more on what went down today in just a bit. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, the family of the Missouri teen who died after sliding off an amusement park ride has filed a wrongful death lawsuit. 14-year-old Tyree Sampson fell off the free fall attraction at Orlando's Icon Park last month. You might remember it. It was covered pretty extensively. The lawsuit claims negligence and says there were no signs saying anything about height or weight restrictions for the ride. From our West Coast Bureau, the FAA says it's looking into a stunt that ended in a plane crash in Arizona after two pilots tried to switch planes in midair at an event hosted by Red Bull. Both pilots, you see it here, managed to get to the ground safely. And from our Northeast Bureau, Republican candidates are facing off tonight in Pennsylvania's Senate debate. It's the first time frontrunners Dr. Mehmet Oz and David McCormick are sharing a stage together, along with some of the other contenders. Democrats debated last week, with both sides fighting for the seat being vacated by retiring Republican Pat Toomey. A Texas court has granted a stay of execution to Melissa Lucio, a mother of 14 children who is set to be executed Wednesday in the death of her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah. Her case will be sent back to a lower court to look at what Lucio says is new evidence that will clear her. In a short statement, she says, "I'm grateful the court has given me the chance to live and prove my innocence. Mariah is in my heart today and always." So here's the deal. Here's why this was such a high-profile and controversial decision and case. Lucio was convicted of capital murder 14 years ago. Prosecutors said she physically abused her daughter and that Mariah had bruises, a head injury, an untreated broken arm. But defense attorneys, Lucio's lawyers, say the case was built on false medical evidence and a coerced confession. Lucio's had supporters from all over the country, even celebrities like Kim Kardashian, who called today's ruling the, quote, best news ever. Danny Savalos is joining me now. And Danny, one of her lawyers today says this decision signaled the court's willingness to finally hear Melissa's side of the story. The New York Times has framed this whole case as kind of a rare example of agreement in a state like Texas, which is fairly polarized. How significant is it that this Texas board decided to give her a stay of execution after she spent this time on death row?
It's not a rare case when you talk about coerced confessions leading to conviction, but you're absolutely right that this is a rare case in which folks from all over the government, different sides of the legislative aisle, they all seem to agree that this is a case that deserves a closer second look. And in reviewing the documents, this seems to me like a relatively common case of law enforcement getting tunnel vision early in a case based on their subjective impressions of how credible the suspect is and narrowing in on a suspect very early. And from there, confirmation bias just flies in. And it's very easy to come up with all kinds of testimony, including from a medical examiner, that's consistent with that initial impression.
And now that her case is getting sent back to lower court, is there new evidence they could get here they might not have had before? Is that how this would work?
It depends procedurally on what that new evidence would be. It generally has to be something that was not available at the time of trial. But they have several other grounds, which are that the original testimony was allegedly falsified, including potentially by the medical examiner. So these are all grounds that could possibly result in a new trial or vacating the conviction. So, I mean, look, in appellate work, you know, everything's a long shot, but getting a second chance is still a second chance. She's still in the game.
Lucio would have been the first Latina woman ever executed by Texas, the first woman who had been put to death in that state since 2014. You had mentioned the sort of support that she'd gotten. Can you talk a little bit more about that, right? It's not just Kim Kardashian. It's lawmakers, too, politicians on both sides of the aisle.
Lawmakers and conservative Republican lawmakers, which is a rarity. I mean, I don't have data on this, but generally speaking, it's not Republican lawmakers that are particularly interested in wrongful convictions or exonerations. I shouldn't say it. I mean, I think they all are. Look, even DA's offices now have wrongful conviction units, and those are growing day by day. So there really is a movement to re-examine past convictions, not just by legislators, but the actual DA's office that may have convicted the defendant. So, I mean, we're definitely moving in a positive direction for these wrongful conviction exoneration cases.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much for that breakdown. Appreciate it. Coming up here after the break, more testimony in Johnny Depp's defamation trial against Amber Heard, including a recording where the actor warns his ex-wife of a bloodbath. We've got that and more coming up. Explosive audio and text in a Virginia courtroom today as Johnny Depp spent his fourth and last day on the witness stand. Heard on a recording during cross-examination warning his ex-wife, Amber Heard, of a, quote, bloodbath if their arguments kept escalating. Listen.
The next move, if I don't walk away or just go out for a little while, it's just gonna be a bloodbath. Like it was on the island, of course, like it was, it's not worth it, man.
I'm not asking you to have a bloodbath before walking away. I'm asking you to work it out over prolonging it and making it bigger.
Depp's attorneys in redirect played multiple clips of emotional arguments between the former couple, with Depp ending his testimony by claiming he himself is a victim of domestic abuse. Remember, Depp is suing Heard over that op-ed that she wrote for $50 million, claiming her article ruined his reputation, even though he was never mentioned specifically by name. Heard is countersuing him for $100 million, also for defamation. Joining me now is Gotti Schwartz. And Gotti, we've heard some pretty graphic language, let's say, in some of this, right? With Depp trying to explain that some of this stuff was supposed to be funny because they were movie references. Explain some of this because it's getting a lot of attention in court.
Yeah, Hallie, the reading of a lot of these texts have led to this very bizarre exchange between Depp and Amber Heard's attorney, almost like you're watching some sort of dark, drawn-out drama with very explicit text read by Heard's attorney in almost like a monotone. And then he asks Depp, did I read that correctly? To which Depp often responds, yes, you read that quite well. It's this very surreal thing to watch. And at one point, Heard's attorney asking Depp about texts in which he writes about burning and drowning Heard, along with other very gruesome details that we can't even share here. Depp testifying that he was alluding to a comedy bit by Monty Python. Take a listen.
The text that is about burning Ms. Heard it's directly from Monty Python. In the sketch about burning witches and then drowning the witches.
And Depp saying he often used dark humor, said he was not proud of some of the other gruesome private text messages he had sent, but insisting that he never physically abused Amber Heard, saying the only person he ever abused was himself, and instead that it was him who was the victim of domestic abuse. Hallie?
The attorneys for Amber Heard also tried to make the point at one point today that Depp's career started to be affected well before this 2018 op-ed that she wrote that's at the center of this, and pointed to some of the sort of media explosion that happened after she first accused him of abuse in 2016. Her team seemed to be getting at the idea, well, you explain it. What was her team trying to get at? I don't want to put words in their mouth, but explain this.
Yeah, it took up a big chunk of the morning, actually. Heard's defense questioning Depp about the long series of headlines that they read to him that predated that op-ed at the center of this defamation suit. Heard's defense saying this is important because they say they show Depp's career appeared to already be in this downward spiral already, but Depp called them hit pieces, Hollywood hit pieces, and his team insists that it was that 2018 op-ed in the Washington Post written by Amber Heard that cost him much of his career. And even though he wasn't specifically named, as you mentioned, that is the center of this lawsuit against Amber Heard for $50 million, with Amber countersuing for $100 million. And this trial is scheduled to last 5 weeks, with Heard also expected to take the stand as well.
Yeah, quite the scene just down south from where we are in Virginia. Gotti Schwartz, thank you so much. Good to see you. That's a wrap for this hour. Good to see you. Good to be back. We're going to have more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.